Hey guys, it's Courtney from Cosmic Clarity Astrology, and I'm here today to talk to you about what kind of love you might be attracting given your birth chart. So, if you have a basic knowledge of astrology or basic understanding of astrology, then you should be able to jump off with this. Even if you don't, you can still Google some stuff. This isn't super in depth because there are many layers, but I'm going to go over my framework of what I look for in somebody's chart to understand kind of their luck in love or lack thereof. And I'm going to go over some examples. So if something doesn't make sense, comment down below if you have further questions, or of course, you can Google it. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about what it is that we're actually looking for in terms of the chart when we're talking about the person that you are going to attract into your life. So all relationships are represented by the seventh house. So anyone that you attract into your life, including your family members that you've chosen as a soul, or the friends that you have coming into your life and your romantic partnerships, those are all related to the seventh house. Planets in this house are going to represent aspects of yourself that are kind of projected outwards through relationships. So I often see this as kind of like the least integrated aspects of the self, that and planets in the 12th, because we will often find people who represent those planets energetically in our lives because we may struggle to fully own and integrate them. So, for example, if you have Mars in the 7th, Mars can be considered a planet of, athleticism, of men, of bravery, of courage, of entrepreneurship, sometimes of aggressiveness, conflict. So you might attract a partner who has those qualities. And if you're super Libra, for example, you might not really embody a lot of those qualities. You might be a little bit focused more on relationships and peace and not rocking the boat. And your partner might be the one who has more of that abrasive or kind of go-getter type of energy that Mars can represent. So planets in the 7th will describe the people in your life and also aspects of the psyche that you need to integrate as a result of those relationships kind of mirroring to you what you are not expressing in yourself. If those planets are on the descendant, which is the cusp of the 7th house, this is going to be a lot more prominent in your life and in your relationships, and it will absolutely show up in the type of romantic partners that you attract. And you have to remember that every planet has positive and negative connotations to it. So it could be a positive element of Mars, maybe an athlete, for example, or a negative element, for example, somebody who is violent. So you don't really know looking at a chart if it's going to manifest positively or negatively right off the bat. But generally, challenging planets like Pluto or even Uranus or Mars or Saturn can indicate a little bit more difficulty in relationships when they fall on the descendant, and sometimes Neptune as well. But that, again, they can all kind of go both ways. So the sign that rules the 7th house. So if you look at the descendant, the 7th house cusp, the line that begins the 7th house, what is the astrological or the zodiac sign that is there? That is going to illustrate also another piece of the fabric or the tapestry of who are you going to attract. So if you have a Pisces descendant versus an Aries descendant, you're going to have a lot of a different kind of partner. I have a Pisces descendant because I'm a Virgo rising, so it's always going to be opposite, the sign opposite your rising sign. So if you're a Libra rising, then you would have an Aries descendant. So I'm going to attract much different kinds of partners with a Pisces descendant. I might attract an artist or, somebody who's spiritual in nature, or people who are really gentle and compassionate. And that's just kind of one layer. The next layer from that is to then look at the planet in charge of that sign. And this holds a little bit more weight, in my opinion, than just the sign on the descendant itself. So the planet in charge of the descendant, so the planet that rules that sign, is going to very accurately describe your partner. And it's so uncanny the degree to which you can see your partner through this, because I have actually seen physical illnesses in somebody's chart that were their partners as a result of this looking at this planet. So you can see like what was going on to that planet and see, oh, they might have this quality, or they might have this happen in their life, or this physical illness in their life. And this is again talking about that person's partner, not about them within the chart, which is really remarkable. So for example, the moon rules over Cancer. So if you have a Cancer descendant, you're going to look for the moon. Sun rules over Leo. Venus rules over Libra and Taurus. Mars rules over Scorpio and Aries. I'm just talking about modern planetary rulers, or sorry, traditional ones. Jupiter rules over Sagittarius and Pisces. Saturn rules over Capricorn and Aquarius. Mercury rules over Gemini and Virgo. And yeah, that's all the signs. So Jupiter also rules over Pisces, like I mentioned. So anyway, you're going to look at the planet that corresponds or rules over that sign on your descendant to describe your partner. So for example, I have a Pisces descendant, but my Jupiter is in Libra. And it's also squaring my Mercury in Cancer. So I would look at that to understand a little bit more about my partner. So for example, my last partner, he had his moon in Libra, quite close to my Jupiter. So you can see how the planet that rules over the 7th house, it really signifies the relationship and the partner. And oftentimes in Sinistry, which is two charts kind of overlay with one another, there will be an interaction between that relationship planet and the other person's chart. So because I have Jupiter in Libra, I'm more likely to attract somebody with Libra qualities as a romantic partner. And my previous partner had his moon in Libra. So you can see again where that connection is. It creates this feeling of, this is what I'm looking for in a partner, and that person has it. And that's the compatibility factor that we look for as astrologers. Everybody's relationship planet is going to be unique to them, and it's going to be the ruler of the sign on the descendant or the 7th house cusp. But there is also a universal relationship planet, which is Venus. And Venus kind of describes our overall quality of relationships. How do we show up in love? How do we give love? How do we receive love or prefer to receive love? What is our story around love? What did our parents show us about how love is, especially affection and physical love? Not from a lust standpoint, that's more Mars, but from, a tender kind of like, again, affectionate, maybe a hug type of energy. So Venus also represents women, especially in a man's chart, or really if you're into women in any degree, Venus is the planet that you're going to be looking towards. Mars represents men. So if you're attracted to men, obviously you're going to look for Mars. It also signifies what you will naturally kind of be attracted to, especially sexually, but also just, what do you find magnetizes you towards it? And so oftentimes I will see a strong connection in Sinistry or partners charts with their Mars, because that's kind of the animal instinct that drives us to procreate. So there is something usually on a very fundamental level that seeks to find a strong and a healthy partner. And where our Mars sign is will indicate kind of the journey around that, or what we're attracted to around that. So we're talking about all these things that we want to look at, all these factors that we want to look at to kind of get an understanding of what you're looking for in a partner, what you're naturally going to attract. And you might be wondering, well, all my partners have been so different from each other. If that's the case, it's likely that maybe certain elements of your chart were more drawn to them than others. For example, if you had a really, really strong Mars connection, but you don't have stuff in the 7th house, this might be someone that you sleep with or that you date for a little while casually, but you're very attracted to them, but you don't necessarily commit to a true partnership. The marriage partner is what falls in the 7th house, or contacts with the 7th house are very common with marriage partnerships, as well as Saturn contacts. I've noticed a lot of Saturn squaring the moon, or Saturn on Venus, or Saturn on the sun, Saturn on the ascendant. Those are kind of the things that create staying power in a relationship. So if you're looking at this, not just wondering, who do I attract, but also, is this person, right for me, or what kind of relationship is this? You want to look at contacts with 7th house, ruler of 7th house, or Saturn, to be involved in a long-term partnership versus just casual flings or things that are just kind of fun with Mars in the 5th house and sometimes Venus. Sometimes Venus. Venus is a planet of friendship. So you really want to have Venus because it helps you get along, where Mars is a planet of conflict. So if you have some strong aspects with Mars and the sun, or Mars square Mars, or Mars opposite Mars, that indicates a little bit of conflict where people have two different ideas of how they want to lead their life. Anyway, this is going way into Sinistry, which I didn't mean to do, but I just wanted to kind of talk about when you're looking at who you're going to track, planets in the seventh house, the planet that rules the seventh house sign or cusp, as well as the sign itself. And you can look at Venus and Mars if you want to as well. When you're looking at all these planets, you also want to know the quality of the planet. So this is where I'm like, okay, it's a little out of the context, out of the scope of this, lesson, I guess, because I feel like you need a little bit of backdrop in astrology to understand all of this, and I didn't want to go into an explanation of all of it. I do have a course about this. I might open it, or I don't know what I'm going to do with it. But if you're interested in that, let me know down below, where I kind of teach all the fundamentals of astrology so you can build upon it with stuff like this. So it's very important to understand the quality of your relationship planet and the quality of your Venus, and even qualities in this, even planets in the seventh house, but especially the quality of your relationship planet in Venus, to understand like how good your love life can be, or kind of how fucked it's going to be, at least at first. This doesn't always mean that you're kind of stuck there, but it does mean that if you have a difficult Venus, you might have quite a few lessons around love before you find a good kind of relationship. So in order to understand how healthy a planet is, how strong a planet is, you have to first know what sign it falls in, because there are some signs where a planet will really excel and it will thrive. It's almost like when you're in your house and you feel really comfortable in your own house, you can thrive in that environment, versus if you went to maybe a family member's house that you really don't like and they're super toxic and you have all this history with them and you feel uncomfortable there. That would be like a planet in a sign it doesn't like to be in. There's an incompatibility in the nature of the planet versus the sign. So an example is Mars in Capricorn is exalted. So Mars is a planet, again, of masculinity, of drive, of kind of going out there and making things happen. And being in Capricorn, this is a sign of the workhorse. This is the person who has a plan, who can take that energy of Mars and mobilize it towards a specific goal. Mars is a warrior and it loves a goal, it loves a mission. It thrives in that kind of environment. However, when you put Mars in Taurus, Taurus is very relaxed. Taurus is ruled by Venus. So Venus enjoys the pleasures of life. It likes to take things really slow. There is a consistent and hardworking energy of Taurus and Capricorn. But the way that they go about it is really different. Mars likes the intensity of Capricorn and the cutthroatness, whereas Taurus is a lot more about creating a sense of ease. And anyway, I think Mars is so fast that it doesn't really want to slow down to enjoy the moment like Taurus does. So it really struggles in this sign. So if you have an Aries descendant and a Mars in Taurus, it might indicate that there are certain lessons that you have to overcome in regards to your relationships before really getting to the good stuff. This could also be the case if Mars is in a difficult house. So for example, if Mars is in the 12th house, the house of the unseen, or of the 8th house, there could be issues around trust, around how, transparent or how well you see your partners, and things of that nature. So the energy of the house and the impact of the house will dictate a lot of how this planet functions there. If this is outside of the scope of your knowledge of astrology, then you can always get a reading from me. I do have a 1-question reading now. So if you have a question around like what kind of relationships do I attract in love, this would be a great 1-question reading. So you can always get that. I will link it down below if this feels a little outside of your scope. The aspects that your Venus and your 7th house ruler are making to other planets are super, super, super important. This will tell you so much about the kinds of people you attract and the kind of journey that you're on in regards to your relationships. So for example, if your relationship planet is Mars, let's continue with that example, and your Mars is opposite Saturn, you might attract some type of relationship with somebody where There is either some distance. I mean, there's a number of things that could be, but there could be some distance. That person could feel quite cold. You could have certain hardships or certain losses in regards to relationships that create issues um, initially for you at the beginning of life. This could also indicate having a really, really long term partnership as well. So, lots of different variations of this. If you have Mars conjunct Jupiter, which is a much more positive planet, you might find that you attract really wealthy partners or people that have kind of more of a public figure, and they can give you some esteem somehow, or they can somehow lift you up within your career or within society in some point, or maybe they're very generous with you. You also want to know if there's other qualifying factors that can create more debility or weakness in the planet. So if a planet is retrograde, it will have a little bit of a weakness, or if it's within 8 degrees of the sun, aka combust the sun, it will also weaken it. So these are some factors that you can look at to understand how strong and how uplifted is this planet. It's kind of like if you have a family member and you make sure that they have all the resources they need to graduate school and they don't go into debt, and you help them get a job and you support them on their learning journey and everything that they need. You help them network and connect with people to get ahead in life. So that's a really, supported planet, versus like a family member where they're kind of neglected. They have to do everything on their own. They have to get a bunch of student debt and start from nothing. That is a planet that might be struggling a little bit or have some weaknesses, like I've mentioned in this slide. So again, that's going to indicate a lot of kind of how your relationships unfold. If a planet isn't as supported, it struggles a little bit more, and that results in maybe having some different hardships in regards to relationships, likely as a result of you maybe choosing the wrong people, for example, or having weird things happen within the relationships that are circumstantial, that are unpleasant, that you have to kind of overcome. So here are some other examples of qualifying things that I look for. So if someone is concerned with cheating, I look for the ruler of the 7th house or Venus in the 12th house, because the 12th house is hidden, it's secret. And so a planet here can often take on the quality of being secretive, and cheating, I think, is a good example of that. Combust the sun, it also has the same energy. The sun is blinding. It creates a lack of vision or ability to see something. Conjunct square opposite Neptune, black moon Lilith. Neptune is also a planet of deception, and black moon Lilith I have seen time and time and time again involved in people with cheating stories. So if this isn't a strong aspect to black moon Lilith, there is likely some kind of storyline around you or your partner or someone in the past having been betrayed or cheated on at some point. It doesn't have to be, but it very, very often is. Another example of kind of the quality of a planet is having Uranus on the descendant cusp, so on the 7th house cusp, or aspecting Venus or the ruler of the 7th house. Uranus, I have seen in really dominant aspects of the relationship part of our chart, can often come out as attracting fearful, avoidant, or dismissive avoidant partners. I think that's dismissive avoidant. I think that's right. I think that's the right word. You'll let me know in the comments down below if I'm saying it wrong. So emotionally unavailable people are people who are hot and who are cold. So they might feel they don't want to be smothered. They want to have a lot of freedom, because that's what Uranus represents, is freedom. And so if they feel like somebody's getting too close to them, then they may kind of pull away. So there can be that back and forth energy. So Saturn can play in a lot of different roles when it's coming up in our relationships. So if Saturn is aspecting your Venus, or especially negative aspect or conjunction, or if it's in your 7th house, or if it's connected by aspect to your 7th house ruler, you might find that there are certain hardships within the relationship, because Saturn does typically indicate that there is something that we have to overcome. However, Saturn can also indicate a lot of longevity with relationships, a lot of commitment, a willingness to do the hard work. So even if there are certain challenges, there is also the quality of resilience that helps you overcome them. Overall, Saturn is a god of time, so it does indicate that there is often something around time. So this could be indicating that you meet someone later in life, or you stay together for a long time, or there's age differences. So there's literally a difference in time that you've been alive. Saturn is also a little bit cold, a little bit detached. So you could have a cold partner, a mean partner, someone who is judgmental of you, someone who's older than you and has this kind of righteousness. There's a lot of different ways that this can manifest. And yeah, Saturn in particular, I have seen have like 1,000 different ways of manifesting. So it's something that you want to look at the context of the chart with. Another example is the ruler of the seventh house in the eighth. For example, I often see this with people who have issues that come up around trust, again, cheating, issues around money, issues around sex, issues around what is whose. So maybe you're entering into a second marriage and you've both been divorced before and you're trying to figure out, assets and stepchildren and who gets what, and it can get a little complicated, for example. And that might be somebody who has an active eighth house or the seventh house ruler in the eighth house. So these are just some examples. Astrology, again, is kind of like a recipe where you're looking at how everything works together as a whole. And these are just some examples of things that I can kind of see through lines with, but you want to look at your individual chart. And again, I can also do that for you if this is a little outside of your scope. Otherwise, it's fun to play around with on your own too. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So this first chart, we're going to look at Jackie Kennedy. I thought it was interesting to look at what she is attracting in love, especially since her husband was assassinated, JFK. So we can see in her chart that she has seventh house cusp Taurus, so Taurus on her descendant. These charts, I put them in Placidus. You can use whole sign. It's up to you. I like to use both, so I kind of just choose them. I look at both of them overall when I do readings. So I just chose Placidus this time around. So Taurus on the seventh house, she has Chiron and the North Node very close to her descendant. And I mentioned that planets, or in this case, points or asteroids on the descendant, play a really, really major role in the kind of partner that you attract, and the kind of things that unfold within your relationships. So with someone who has the North Node on their descendant, this is somebody who, from a destiny standpoint, from a soul evolution standpoint, was meant to have and experience important relationships in her life to open her up to greater stability through connection, through support, and through love. So this is, again, somebody who is always destined to have a key partnership in their life, or maybe a key friend or key family member, like the act of coming together, uniting with other people to help her soul evolve. I'm not going to go super into that, but you can see past lives in astrology and kind of why she might need that, but that's a whole other thing. So Chiron is also here on the North Node. Chiron is an asteroid of wounding, and I very, very often see it involved in things that are physically or emotionally traumatic that often can stem from childhood or from a past life if you want to go that far. It doesn't have to, but I very, very often see it triggered in kind of more emotionally sensitive and, again, kind of traumatic instances in our life. So to have Chiron on the North Node here, to me, either indicates that there needs to be some healing in regards to relationships, as her soul is meant to have that, but also that means that there's something that's going to hurt. If there's something that needs to be healed, something is hurting. So for her, she was always kind of meant to be in a partnership, and it was supposed to be something that she had to heal from. That is what I feel like North Node and Chiron represent. She also has Jupiter in the seventh house in Placidus. Jupiter, like I mentioned, can elevate you. So it can indicate a partner that gives you something that helps move you up in the world, somebody who's prosperous, somebody who's famous, somebody who's better off than you in some way, because that's the nature of Jupiter. It's generous, it's giving, and it has an uplifting, buoyant quality. So we can see, obviously, she married a president. That's somebody who uplifted her from a social standpoint and a financial standpoint. A Taurus descendant, this is why I talked about somebody, she was meant to have somebody maybe more practical, or somebody who could help create more stability in her life. Again, The descendant is important, but not as important as the planet ruling it. So in this case, Venus in Gemini, which is in the 8th house, and it's opposite Saturn. So we did talk about Saturn, and how it can indicate a lot of different things. But having your planetary ruler opposite Saturn, your 7th house ruler, your relationship ruler, opposite Saturn does indicate a little bit of challenge here in regards to relationships. The 8th house is actually the house of death. It is also the house of secrets and trust issues and sex. So all those things are really prominent within her relationships. And being opposite the Saturn in the 2nd house, there is also some things here around independence versus kind of codependence. There could be some financial things going on here as well that are also influential. But generally speaking, having the 7th house ruler opposite Saturn to me indicates, especially with also Chiron on the North Node there and Chiron on the descendant, it really does indicate that this tragedy wasn't coincidental, right? With Saturn, again, very often being involved in some type of loss or some type of hardship. We can see that she was kind of always meant to have some degree of hardship within her relationship that she needed to heal from. In the case with her husband, it did end up being tragedy and death, but it doesn't always have to be so intense for all these examples. So let's look at their charts together. I'll try to make this brief because this is not really meant to be about Sinistry, but I did want to indicate like the overlap here. So we can see, for example, we want to look at her relationship planet. We mentioned Venus in Gemini was her relationship planet. Well, guess what? His Venus is also in Gemini and it's sitting right on top of hers. So they have this immediate friendship connection, and it's specifically based in the mind and communication because Gemini rules over those things. So this is a relationship of kind of equal minds, finding someone who is your intellectual match, who can banter with you or has a similar idea of what they value in life, because Venus rules over our values. So to have your relationship planet on someone else's Venus is this kind of mutual attraction, getting along, like this is kind of who I'm looking for in a partner. His moon was on her Mars. Again, I mentioned Mars has a lot to do with attraction, and his moon, which is kind of who you are behind closed doors, who you are in a more intimate type of relationship, she was attracted to that type of person. His sun was on her Jupiter. This is one of the most positive aspects you can have because it does indicate that you guys are uplifting one another. Jupiter does tend to kind of teach the sun person something or help them in ways that they help them expand their life, help them grow, maybe help them believe in themselves more or look at things from a different perspective. In this case, because it's in the same sign, I would say she in many ways helped elevate him and he equally did that for her. But I mentioned planets in the 7th house do indicate your partner, and her Jupiter is right on his sun. So he embodied with his sun his identity. He embodied in many ways that kind of social elevation that's naturally or natally in her chart. He embodies that through his identity. So yeah, and we can see his Mars, well, he has really a stellium here, Mars, Mercury, and Jupiter all in Taurus sitting right on her relationship line. So we can see why this relationship was what it was, why they had such a deep connection, why they loved each other so much and really hit it off. Yes, there was some complications to the relationship. He did cheat on her. We do see his Neptune on her Mercury. I mentioned Neptune is a planet of deception. So when we see a strong Neptune connection, there is a potential for there to be some sort of deception. It doesn't have to mean that there's cheating. It could indicate that, someone wears rose-colored glasses or someone talks very poetically about things and isn't harsh about things. It could be, slight alterations of the fabric of reality to make it look prettier, or it could be a downright lie where you are cheating and have mistresses and things of that nature. We see also Saturn is squaring her moon, which does indicate longevity there as well. Okay, so let's look at Dolly Parton because she has been married for 58 years to Carl Dean. And I want to see like what makes, a successful relationship. And this is not really a chart that you would look at and be like, oh, this person is going to have an amazing love life. There are quite a few elements of her chart that I'm like, that looks like a little bit difficult actually. But we're going to talk about the nuance here, because you can have difficult placements in your chart when it comes to love, and you can still have an amazing love life and a really enduring love, but it's not always going to be without difficulty in other ways that could challenge the relationship on an emotional level. And we'll talk about that. So here's an example, Dolly Parton with no planets in the seventh house. So I do like that because it shows you how you can have such a rich and important and significant love life and relationship without any planets in that house. It doesn't indicate that it's a less active, or I guess less important part of your life, but it's just the way that your chart is set up. So instead, for this case, you want to look at the descendant, which is Pisces, and the planet in charge of that, which is Jupiter. We can see here Jupiter is also next to Chiron. So again, I'm like, okay, what's going on here? With Jupiter next to Chiron, this can indicate a number of things. This could indicate having a partner who is really sensitive, because again, Chiron is kind of where we go through certain challenges and traumas and emotional triggers. And so people with Chiron will often be very emotionally sensitive, especially to other people's needs, because they've been through a lot usually. We can see Jupiter is in Libra. So with Pisces descendant, Jupiter in Libra, this is actually the same placement that I have. You're likely to attract people who are pretty easygoing, people who are maybe people pleasers. Maybe some of their issues are actually being kind of forthright and rocking the boat a little bit. So, if this were the only aspect of her chart going on, I would be, curious if her partner was firm, enough with her or with others for things to be healthy, because sometimes, Libra and Pisces, that can be something that they struggle with. So her Jupiter is also in this exact square to Venus. And again, Venus is a planet of friendship. So this is a very beautiful aspect. And I think this is kind of what really revives a lot of her chart. Not only is her relationship planet in Venus, in Libra, which is a Venus ruled sign. So Libra is all about relationships as a sign, and with her relationship planet in a sign about relationships, it does indicate that this is going to be a relationship kind of person that she attracts. And again, it's also squaring Venus. So the person that she attracts is meant to be also in her life as a true friend, a true companion. However, it is making this square to Mars and Saturn. I'm going to come back to that in a second. Her Venus is also combusts the sun. So it's within 3 degrees of the sun. So what do we see with this? Well, there's usually something going on in this person's life where their love life or their career will overshadow one or the other. With famous people, obviously, we do tend to see that it's the career that overshadows their love life. I have seen other people where their relationship becomes their identity, and they really kind of get wrapped up into that. There's other ways to interpret Venus and the sun. A lot of people who are artists, which obviously Dolly Parton is an artist, she's a singer, have a placement like this because Venus rules over art. However, it also indicates that the career can come first, because the sun represents career, and it's so blinding, so dominating. It takes over Venus. Venus is kind of shrouded in the shadows of the massive light of the sun. So it's almost like your career overshadows your relationship. And in certain ways, we can see that. I mean, she attracted a partner who really didn't want to be in the spotlight, and it was almost like this kind of compartmentalized life. But there are likely times in her life where she may have felt like, am I putting my career first or my relationship first? And it could have felt like you have to kind of like acknowledge what gear you're in at that time of your life. And it could really feel like it's kind of one or the other. That could also happen with an opposition. So, yes, the other element of her chart is Jupiter making a square to Mars and Saturn. So this is kind of wide for a square. I wouldn't necessarily like be super I would be questioning how influential this is, because usually I'm looking at things like 5 degrees or less to be really in a tight square, whereas this is kind of going on like 6 degrees. So regardless, I think you could still feel it. With an aspect like this, the first thing I thought about when I saw her chart, because I also do medical astrology readings with both of these planets, which these are considered malefic planets, like aka bad planets that kind of hurt you somehow. They're both in Cancer, which in medical astrology rules over the uterus and the womb. And I believe Dolly had a partial hysterectomy and was not able to have children with her partner. And I know that they originally wanted to. So with this square here, I do feel like there's an indication that at some point that could have been really painful for them as a couple, or painful for him, for example, or affected their relationship. I'd be really curious about that. If not, I mean, even if that wasn't the case, regardless, I think that they are happy now around how things turned out for them. Another element of this that is super, super interesting is, again, Jupiter rules over her partner, and squaring these planets in Cancer. Cancer also rules over the memory, over the hippocampus. So her partner was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so I think, one of the kind of tragic elements of Mars and Saturn together, again, this is a hard aspect, especially in a square to your relationship ruler, she could have a really, really good love life, but then her partner develops Alzheimer's and it's like she's alone. Or he's not himself anymore. And so there is that kind of that memory loss, that tragedy along with that. And so, sorry, I meant to be choosing like really positive examples, but it's kind of hard to find stuff where nobody has anything sad happening. But regardless, this planet is both supported and challenged in her chart. And she had, she currently is in a very long marriage, 58 years. They're both very happy together. But there is that element, and he's her rock. She said many times that he's her rock. But there is that element of him, developing Alzheimer's later in life and not having children together, and certain health implications that we can see in her chart as well. So again, you can see in her chart his relation or his memory issues. So not everything in your chart is just about you. Okay, so third example, Okay, let's actually look at, before we move on to another example, let me illustrate kind of their Sinistry connections just briefly. Gosh darn it. Okay, so I mentioned that Jupiter is her relationship planet, and his moon, Carl's moon, is on her Jupiter and her Chiron. So again, almost always, if this is like a legit relationship, almost always there's going to be some type of aspect with the seventh house ruler. It doesn't have to be. It definitely doesn't have to be. There can be other things involved. But that's usually a strong indicator that what I'm looking for in love as a soul, what I'm naturally going to attract, this person embodies. And so I can kind of tell, like, is this a good match? Are they compatible? Or is there something that the soul is asking for that this person can't really deliver? And so if you have no aspects going on with your relationship planet to that person's chart, that could be an indication that there's maybe some ingredient missing there. Again, it depends on the whole. That's not the only factor, though. So don't worry too much if you don't have that connection. His Venus is on her North Node. I mentioned that the North Node is about destiny, and Venus is a relationship planet and a planet of friendship. So they were destined to be together. They were destined to have some kind of connection, maybe artistic or friendship, whatever that connection is, isn't always clear, but they were destined to have this kind of in longevity, or maybe not longevity with this alone, but they were destined to have some kind of journey together in a relationship. His North Node is also on her moon. So again, for her, in many ways, he came in here she was also part of his identity. A little bit of different ways, because the moon and Venus have slightly different meanings, but regardless, it's a intimate connection that was meant to be. His sun is also opposite her Venus, pretty much exactly. So this, again, is a strong factor in friendship and connection, although his sun is quite close to her Saturn and Mars. So this is the part of her chart that I'm like, oof, that's a little rough. So I do wonder how this kind of impacted their relationship. And again, another long-lasting relationship, and her Saturn squares his moon. We also saw that in the previous relationship chart that we just looked at. Okay, last example. I did not mean to make this video this long. I guess I'm just long-winded. Comment down below what you like in terms of video length, because I'm really curious. Like, I do want to teach more, but I don't want to burden you guys too much. Okay, so the next one we're going to look at King Edward II of England. I'm not a real history buff, so I did have to look some of the stuff online. And apparently his birthday is accurate, but he was born in 1284. So I don't know how we have records from 1284, but apparently we have accurate records from them. Okay, so his 7th house has Capricorn on the cusp, on the descendant. The North Node is also here. So this is another person destined to experience something within relationships. What's interesting is that Uranus is on his South Node and opposite the North Node. So we're like, okay, Uranus is a planet of change, of surprise, of chaos. And so I am curious, and we did mention that kind of someone being maybe like hot and cold or emotionally distant. That could also be happening with Uranus. Uranus, especially aspecting Venus, I have seen this, or aspecting the descendant, I've seen this very, very often involved in those who are homosexual. And King Edward II was rumored to have a relationship with a man. So there could definitely be some of that going on here. And that could have been something that with this opposition to the North Node, that eccentricity, which is not really that eccentric, but I guess in terms of like what's statistically most common, Uranus would indicate having sexual interests that are out of the norm. So if he's homosexual, and is this going against the North Node on the 7th house, which is going against the established kind of status quo, especially within his relationship, but within society, because Capricorn is a very traditional sign. It is focused on like what society tells us is like the right thing to do, or what, your family or history has kind of said you need to do it. There's a lot around like, duty and responsibility that gets all tangled up within relationships, which makes sense because King Edward II was married or promised to Queen Isabella at just 12 years old. So you can see how there is quite a lot here around kind of duty and sacrifice in relationships. The ruler of his relationships is Saturn, because Saturn rules over Capricorn, and Saturn is sitting right next to Pluto and right next to Black Moon Lilith. I will say that Saturn and Pluto coming together in the sky is a rare event, and it is an unfortunate event because these planets do tend to bring tragedy. When we had the last conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, that's when COVID started. So you can imagine that this guy was born with this in his relationship area. So that's the energy that he's bringing into his love life. And I mentioned Black Moon Lilith. This point here is often associated with cheating or some kind of betrayal. Not always, but is often associated with that. So we're already starting to see a picture that is not so attractive for a relationship chart. On top of this, his Saturn is quincunxing his moon. So the moon represents the physical body, and a quincunx is a health aspect. I don't usually like to look at it as much in like a psychological sense or in like a, events in your life kind of way through the chart, but in terms of the physical body and the physical well-being, you absolutely want to look at a quincunx. So there's an indication here that there's something about his relationship that could pose a threat in some ways to the physical body or the health and his well-being. So that is very curious. And again, these planets, Saturn, the North Node, they're opposite Uranus, which does indicate something surprising, something chaotic, someone cold and distant, those things that I kind of mentioned.